The Gita Mahatmyam offers us some benediction for reading the book. It says, Gita Dhyayana Shilasya Pranayama Parasya Cha Naiva Shanti Hi Papani Purva Janma Kritani Cha. If one reads Bhagavad Gita very sincerely and with all seriousness, then by the grace of the Lord, the reaction of his past misdeeds will not act upon him. Maline mochanam pungsam jalasnanam dine dine sakred gitamritam snanam sangsara malanashanam. One may cleanse himself daily by taking a bath in water, but if one takes a bath even once in the sacred Ganges water of Bhagavad Gita, for him the dirt of material life is altogether vanquished. Bharatamritam sarvasvam Vishnu vaktrad vinishritam Gita gangorakam vidva punarjanmana vidyate. One who drinks the water of the Ganges attains salvation. So what to speak of one who drinks the nectar of Bhagavad Gita? Bhagavad Gita is the essential nectar of the Mahabharata, spoken by Lord Krishna himself, the original Vishnu. Sarvo Panishado Gavo Dugda Gopalanandana Partho Vatsa Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gitamritam Mahat. This Gita Upanishad, Bhagavad Gita, is the essence of all Upanishads, and it's just like a cow. Lord Krishna, who is famous as a cowherd boy, is milking this cow. Arjuna is just like a calf, and learned scholars and pure devotees are to drink the nectarine milk of Bhagavad Gita. Ekam Shastram Devaki Putra Gitam, Eko Devo Devaki Putra Eva, Eko Mantras Tasya Namani Jani, Karma Pya Ekam, Tasya Devasya Seva. In this present day, people are very eager to have one scripture, one God, one religion, and one occupation. Therefore, Ekam Shastram Devaki Putra Gita. Let there be one scripture only, Bhagavad Gita. Let there be one God, Sri Krishna, and one mantra, the chanting of his name, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So we come to the 14th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. This is called the three modes of material nature, or Guna Traya Vibhaga Yoga. So this is an interesting chapter. It's only 20 verses long, but reflects on many important ideas. For example, the problem of evil. Does evil exist? Well, according to Christian doctrine, evil exists because of original sin. According to Christian mythology, Adam and Eve ignore the Lord's instructions and eat from the tree of knowledge. So their desire for independence brings about a kind of separation, and this is called as original sin. The idea is their turn from innocence to knowledge means they must leave the Garden of Eden, which represents purity. So love and innocence wasn't enough for our original parents of mankind. They wanted knowledge. And that's interesting because we think that real love should go beyond knowledge. Sometimes we think you can't love something unless you understand it. Well, I love doshas and idlis, and a lot of Indian food I don't really understand, but I love it. So understanding is not necessary for love, and sometimes too much analysis gets in the way of faith. So Christianity demands surrender and obedience to Christ, but perfect obedience should mean love without knowledge. Therefore, love is higher than knowledge, and knowledge is the original sin. Only through pure love and surrender can you receive the mercy of the Lord through the sacrifice of Christ, according to this doctrine, and this way become free from sin and return to innocence in heaven. And then the Christians, and not only the Christians, but the entire Judeo-Christian tradition, including Islam, you might say the Abrahamic religions, they put a lot of emphasis on this idea of good and evil, and they paint hell hot and sin black. But the Vedic worldview is really quite different, and we see this worldview represented here in the 14th chapter. In the Vedic worldview, we're not cast into this world as punishment exactly, but are turning away from divinity as an expression of our own free will. So the suffering we face in this world is a consequence of our own action. This means some people, especially atheists, they try to say, well, if God is good, then why is there suffering? But the Vedas would answer the suffering that we face in this world is a consequence of our own karma. So the idea is to try to balance one's karma. Karma is not necessarily evil, but a consequence of our involvement in the world of Maya. So in the Vedic view, we don't have exactly the idea of good and evil. In Christianity, this is a study in black and white. It's good or it's bad. There are some shades of gray. But here in the 14th chapter, the Bhagavad Gita presents the idea of good and evil, or ethical consideration, as more of a multifaceted problem. It's as if the three modes of nature, sattva, raja, and tama, are like different colors. So if you look around, if you're looking at your computer screen right now, all those colors that you see on the computer screen are really based on three different colors: red, yellow, and blue, or cyan, magenta, and yellow, or green, red, and white, depending on the computer. Which means you can represent thousands and thousands of different shades and colors by just using those three. And this is a more subtle approach than just saying, well, it's black and white. But this makes ethical considerations more difficult, because we don't live in a world of black and white, but a world of infinite gradations of color. Then how should we act? So Arjuna is constantly going back to the problem of how should he act? What is the ethical consideration? Whereas Krishna himself is exploring the ideal world. So there's always a conflict between sort of ideal philosophical principles and ethical considerations. So in Sanskrit, of course, action, good or bad, is called karma. Ethical considerations we call dharma. But there's two tracks of Dharma in the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata, and in fact, in all the Vedas. There's what we call Varna Dharma, which is sort of social religion, where rules govern everyday behavior according to one's position in caste or society. And the different rules and injunctions for everyday behavior at this level are found in places like the laws of Manu and elsewhere in the Vedas. But in the Gita, Krishna's already told Arjuna, go beyond these laws. He says, Trigunya Vishaya Veda, Nishtrigunya Bhavarjuna, in the second chapter. He says the Vedas mostly talk about the three modes of material nature, how to be good, how to avoid bad action, but in a kind of a more subtle way, because as I already said, we don't talk so much about good and evil, but what's inauspicious, what's auspicious, what's pap and what's punya. But he tells Arjuna, while the Vedas do talk about these things, you should transcend such a superficial understanding, because as long as one is determined to remain within the cycle of birth and death within the material world, you may follow these conventional laws of society, but there's a higher path. The idea is something like in a prison house. This material world is like a prison house. So if you follow the rules in the prison, you can get a higher position. So there's some people in the prison who are allowed to go outside the prison walls, and they can have a garden and cultivate their flower garden or their tomato patch, and have a nicer uniform and a nicer place to sleep, as long as they follow the rules. Whereas there's other people in the prison who are always making plans to escape and buying and selling things in the prison and making deals. And then on the bottom level, there's the grossest criminals who are engaged in such violent and terrible acts that they have to be confined to the lowest cells of darkness in the dungeons. So the three modes of material nature is something like that. There's goodness, passion, and ignorance. And on a higher level, one who acts in goodness can live a happy life. But in the end, whether you live a happy life, a miserable life, or an animal life, these things are all taking place within the prison. So in the second chapter of the Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna, rise above the three modes of material nature. So there's a higher track of Dharma for saintly persons, enlightened beings. The idea is that on a higher level, those who are striving for spiritual perfection, they don't need to be told all the time about the 10 commandments, not to kill, don't steal, don't have adultery. Their tendency is always towards living a high quality moral life. So there's a sort of higher kind of Dharma for such saints. This would be Paramahansa Dharma. And so the path of surrender recommended here by Krishna and affirmed later by generations of saints up to Bhaktivinoda Thakur in the present age is for swan-like souls who transcend the modes of nature discussed here in this chapter. So if the Vedas mainly speak of action and reaction within the modes of nature, Krishna tells Arjuna again and again, rise above this ordinary thinking and embrace the path of surrender, sharanagati, the path of bhakti, and enter on a more godly way of life. So to summarize the 14th chapter, Krishna describes how the fallen conditioned souls become trapped in the cycle of birth and death and addicted to these qualities of nature called guna, sattva, rajas, and tamas. He explains the basic nature of these qualities and tells Arjuna that true knowledge involves understanding of how the modes of nature work. Tells him this at the beginning of the chapter. He then goes on to advocate for a divine life based on surrender, by which one may transcend the modes of nature. And then Arjuna asks Krishna, well, what are the qualities of such saintly person? And Krishna responds, ending the chapter. So I'll read some of the shlokas. Sri Bhagavan Uvacha Param Bhuya Pravakshyami Jnanam Uttamam Yajgyatva Munaya Sarve Param Siddhi Itogataha. Supreme Personality of Godhead said, again, I shall declare to you this supreme wisdom, the best of all knowledge, knowing which all the sages have attained the supreme perfection. So Krishna begins the chapter talking about knowledge. He says, try to understand about these modes of nature. He'll end the chapter advocating for love above knowledge, but he begins by explaining what sort of knowledge will you get by what I'm about to say. Idam jnanam pashritya mama saradharam yamagataha sarge pi nopajayante pralaye nav vyatanti cha. He says, in becoming fixed in this knowledge, one can attain to the transcendental nature like my own, and thus established one is not born at the time of creation, nor disturbed at the time of dissolution. Mama yonir mahad brahma tasmin garbham dadamyaham sambhava sarva bhutanam tato bhavati bharata. The total material substance called Brahman is a source of birth, and it is that Brahman that I impregnate, making possible the births of all living beings, O son of Bharat. So this is really a very interesting verse because he says, Mama Yonir Mahat Brahma. Mahat Brahma refers to the total material existence. Now, normally the word Brahma means something like spirit, but in this case, it's referring to the total material nature. So here the Bhagavad Gita is explaining the evolution of consciousness in reverse. At the beginning of the creation, matter is inert, and creation begins when the Supreme Lord impregnates the inert total material energy, here called Brahma, with spiritual energy, sort of fusion of biology with chemistry taking place at the organic level. And gradually, biological entities take shape. So here the Gita explains that mundane prakriti is something like a womb within which the Supreme Lord injects the spiritual seed of all life. And in that sense, he's the birth origin of all that lives and moves. But people are always asking me to elaborate on the idea of subjective evolution. And you can see this is really what's being described here. It's being explained that within the Mayic energy, the total material substance exists in a kind of a potential pre-nascent state, a sort of inert material plasma without any consciousness or biological factors. And this original plasma from which the universe expands is referred to in different ways here. According to the Acharyas, it's called Brahma, which normally refers to spirit. But in this case, it's a potential aspect of matter in a plasmic state. And Krishna says this substance or plasma is inert until it's impregnated with spiritual energy by God himself. And that's a little difficult for people in the present scientific age to wrap their mind around. But the idea that there's some kind of metaphysical reality beyond this physical reality has been entertained for thousands of years by enlightened human beings in India and in the Western world since the time of Plato and, of course, Jesus Christ, the church, theological thinkers. So Krishna says, impregnating matter with spirit, I make possible the birth of all living beings. As a consequence, time and space unfold. So the idea is that even time does not exist. Time can only be seen when there's movement of something. And as long as nothing is moving, you can't detect any time moving if there's no living beings also. So even time itself doesn't exist. But when the material energy is impregnated with spiritual energy, time and space begin to unfold with the five elements, the five objects of the senses themselves, mind, intelligence, and false ego. And the universe, now that it's saturated with conscious biological entities, is gradually born, having been injected with the seed of these living entities. And so this idea, it's not new. I was thinking, people always ask me about subjective evolution of consciousness as if it's a new idea. Not really a new idea. This is the basic understanding of the first creation given in many different Vedic scriptures, from the Nasadiya Sukta of the Rig Veda to Vishnu and Bhagavat Puranas. And also, especially, you can find this in the Brahma Samhita, which is commented upon by Jiva Goswami sometime in the 16th century. So, of course, in the West, we get this sort of atheistic question. If God created the universe, then who created God? But if you look at the Vedas and the Puranas and the Upanishads, what you find is there are many creations. The creator of the universe is said to live for 100 of his years, which are millions and millions and millions of years by our calculation. And every one of his days lasts for millions of years. And every day he has to create the universe anew. So when you say, if God created the universe, who created God? Well, which creation are you talking about? And which Brahma and which universe? So the Vedas and Upanishads reduce the whole idea of the creation to a very relativistic concept. If there are millions of multi-universes with millions of multi-creator Brahmas in those millions of universes, who was the original and where did it all begin? It's kind of an unfair question. But even then, like a Russian doll that you open and find, oh, there's a new doll in there, and oh, there's a smaller doll inside there, or the infinite regression of mirrors that's talked about by Jorge Luis Borges. Like when you sit in the barber shop to get a haircut and you notice there's a mirror in front and a mirror behind, and you can see your image reflected thousands of times. Where does it all begin? Well, if these sorts of procreations or secondary creations are described like that, the original creation of the universe goes along these lines. Somehow metaphysical energy and physical energy are combined. And we're not exactly sure how that goes on because it's really beyond our knowledge. So that's kind of how the creation is described in the Vedas. So we can say that matter relies on spirit. It's not that chemicals produce consciousness. It's the other way around. So somehow perception becomes reality. So does that mean that matter is not real? This will be the thing that gets thrown back in your face if you say, well, everything is based on consciousness. Matter is real, especially according to the view of Madhva. Madhvacharya had a very strong kind of dualism where he tells us that God is real, matter is real, spirit is real. He doesn't hold with Shankaracharya, who says that this world is an illusion. Shankaracharya would have it that we're all God, and somehow we've created an illusion of matter, and we have to escape from the illusion. But Madhva likes the idea that the world is concrete reality. It's backed by godly power. Our perception is reinforced by God's material energy known as Maya, in the sense that spirit is eternal and physical reality is always temporary. Matter has no lasting reality. And in that sense, it may be called an illusion, but the world is not an illusion in the sense that it does not exist at all, as Shankar would try to tell us. Madhva tells us that God is real, matter is real, spirit is real. Problem is, he insists on an absolute dualism called Dvaitavad. And at some point, the absolute nature of his dualism becomes tenuous. It's a bit shaky. So Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taught us that a more subtle analysis is required. And he called, or subsequent acharyas called his doctrine, Achintya Veda Veda Tattva. The idea is that there is dualism, but it's not absolute. In some subtle ways, there's oneness between all these different elements as seen in the interplay between them. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's system is called inconceivable simultaneous oneness and difference. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj, he liked using a Hegelian dialectic to contemplate Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's view: thesis, synthesis, and antithesis. Thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So matter and spirit are distinct as thesis and antithesis. And yet there's a certain synthesis at work. For example, in the living biological units that surround us, it's difficult to separate living matter from the soul proper. You can look at microorganisms and viruses and try to separate out how is this a living entity or not. So at least some qualified dualism must be admitted, and that's seen in Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's system. And I have the commentaries here by the different acharyas, but really I'm sort of summarizing. Bhakti Pradeep Tirtha was Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's first sannyas disciple, and he was also a follower of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And he comments on this verse like this. He says, in this verse, Krishna says that the expansive Prakriti is the material aspect of my spiritual Prakriti. I place the seed of Tatastha Jiva in the womb of this expansive Prakriti, and all beings from Brahma downwards are born of Prakriti, and they come into existence in this world. Then I suppose I could talk more about this next time, but I don't want to take up the whole hour. So text 5, Sattvam Rajas Tama Iti, Guna Prakriti Sambhava. Now that this world has come into existence, we find that there's certain influences at work. And Krishna says, Sattvam Rajas Tama Iti, Guna Prakriti Sambhava, Nibadnanti Mahabaho, Dekhe Dekhinam Avyayam. He says, material nature then consists of three modes: goodness, passion, and ignorance. And the language that's used here is also interesting because the word guna, it can mean quality, but it also means thread. So you can think of the modes of nature as sort of threads that weave this material energy together. When the living entity becomes in contact with nature, he becomes conditioned by these modes. That's also interesting, conditioned. He becomes conditioned. Nibaddanti. It's something like, I wrestle with the question of how is it that matter can affect consciousness? Aren't we the subject? If we're the subject and matter is the object, how is it the object works on the subject? But it's something like alcoholism. Alcohol is a material object, it's a material thing. But because someone comes in connection with that material thing, it affects their consciousness. So they become addicted. And the more they drink and drink, the more addicted they become. So the modes of nature are kind of like that. We become addicted to our conditioning. Krishna says, Tatra Sattvam Nirmalatvat Prakashakam Anamaya Shuka Sangena Badnanti Jnana Sangena Chanaga. O sinless one, the mode of goodness, being purer than the others, is illuminating, and it frees one from all sinful reactions. Those situated in that mode become conditioned by a sense of happiness and knowledge. So the idea of conditioning, it's like addiction. So as the soul in the mode of goodness gradually becomes addicted to the mode of goodness. And it's nice in the mode of goodness. There's more light, it's more pure, there's less karma. It tends to happiness and knowledge. So you become attached to happiness. But remember, Krishna's already told Arjuna, avoid attachment to the three modes of nature. So even sattva gun is a kind of trap. Rajo ragatmakam vidhi, Trishna sanga samudbhavan, tan nibadnati konteya, karma sangena dekhinam. It's just the mode of passion is born of unlimited desires and longings, O son of Kunti. And because of this, the embodied living entity is bound to material actions. And Prabhupada comments here, he says, the mode of passion is characterized by the attraction between man and woman. So you could say Raja means raga. It's creativity, but passion, sex, libido, desires, hankering. And in this way, you become addicted to karma. And then the mode of darkness, tama. Tamas tvagyanajam vidhi mohanam sarvadehinam. Pramadalasya nirabdis tannibad nati bharata. O Bharat, know that the mode of darkness born of ignorance is the delusion of all embodied living entities. The results of this mode are madness, indolence, and sleep, which bind the conditioned soul. So, of course, in much of our discussion or our meditation on the meaning of the Gita here, we're applying this to the human sector. We're thinking about human consciousness and how human consciousness is affected by Sattva, Raja, and Tama. But later on in the Gita, in the 16th chapter, Krishna will give a wider interpretation to how the modes of nature affect everything in a chapter called The Divine and Demonic Natures. Krishna describes many different things in the mode of goodness, in the mode of passion, in the mode of ignorance. So while we normally apply this to human consciousness, you can also see other living entities within these different modes. For example, animals. So there's also animals in the mode of goodness, darkness, and ignorance, especially tamagun. So what Krishna is saying here is, if you become addicted to an animal mentality, if you associate too much with the mode of darkness or tamagun, you will develop an animal body. And he says this binds you to madness, delusion and madness. So again, if you go back to the example of alcohol, people who drink a little bit of alcohol, they're kind of happy. People who drink more alcohol, they're always involved in sex and passion and libido. But people who are absolute alcoholics are going down into delusion and madness. So the modes of nature are like that. Rajas tamas chabi bhuya sattvam bhavati bharata. Rajas sattvam tamas chaiva tamas sattvam rajas tata. Sometimes the mode of goodness becomes prominent, defeating passion and ignorance. Sometimes passion defeats goodness and ignorance. And at other time, ignorance defeats goodness and passion. In this way, there's always competition for supremacy. So as we were talking before, if you think of these different modes as being different colors, like the mode of goodness, you could represent that with yellow because there's more light, and passion is red, Raja, and darkness tends more towards blue, depression. But these colors are rarely found completely isolated. There's always some combination. So what Krishna says here is that these different influences, they combine, they play off one another. They create a myriad of other different colors, and color our activities. Then Krishna becomes a little more specific. He says, Sarva dvareshu dekesmin prakasha upajayate jnanam jadata vidyad vivridam sattvam ityuta. He says that manifestation of the modes of goodness can be experienced when all the gates of the body are illuminated by knowledge. So sattva guna tends towards knowledge. And that's a beautiful thing. We see people who are advanced human beings illuminated by knowledge. We can understand they're influenced by sattva gun. This is not the highest position. Krishna's already explained that, but we're looking at the three different modes. Lobha pravitir arambha karmanam ashama spriha rajasi etani jayante vivridhe bharatarshava. O chief of the Bharats, when there's an increase in the mode of passion, symptoms of great attachment, fruitive activities, intense endeavor, and uncontrollable desire and hankering develop. Well, when the motive, Krishna also explains earlier in the Gita, guna karma vibhagashaha, according to one's guna and one's karma, chatur varna maya shrishtam, the different varnas or social castes evolve or become developed. So those who are more in sattva guna, the brahmanas, a mix of sattva guna and raja, the kshatriyas, more raja guna, money, the vaishyas, and then more tamaguna, a little grosser, the shudras. So the idea of social divisions in society is based on the development of these different qualities. Prabhupada comments, one in the mode of passion is never satisfied with the position he's already acquired. He hankers to increase his position. If he wants to construct a residential house, he tries his best to have a palatial house, as if he would be able to reside in that house eternally. And he develops a great hankering for sense gratification. There's no end to sense gratification. So in Rajaguna, no one ever has enough money. The more money they have, the more money they need, the more money they want. Krishna moves on. He says, Aprakasho pravitischa, pramado moha evacha, tamasi etani jayante, vivride kuru nandana. And it's interesting, he says, oh child, kuru nandana, my son, son of the Kurus. When there is an increase in the mode of ignorance, then darkness, inertia, madness, and illusion are manifested. And then he describes different deaths. He says, when one dies in the mode of goodness, he attains to the pure higher planets of great sages. When one dies in the mode of passion, he takes birth among those engaged in fruitive activities. So he's saying, if you're predominantly involved in sattva or raja, he says you may go up to heaven, or you may take birth again in the world of karma. But he says, and one dies in the mode of ignorance, tata pralinas tamasi mudha jonisha jayate. He takes birth in the animal kingdom. Mudha, it also means fool, it also means donkey, like a burro or an ass. So maybe there's hope that you will be born as a foolish human being. But Prabhupada says here, when one dies in the mode of ignorance, he takes birth in the animal kingdom. So sometimes you look at a dog. I've had this happen. There's some dogs, if you look in their eyes, they have a sort of existential sadness, like their life as a dog is not really very fulfilling. And they're thinking, what would it be like to be a human being? I don't know, maybe I'm just, personifying something. I'm being anthropomorphic or something, but sometimes you look in a dog's eyes and you can think the dog is wondering, what would it be like to be human? Krishna says, the result of pious action is pure and is said to be in the mode of goodness. Action done in the mode of passion results in misery, and action performed in the mode of ignorance results in darkness. He's talking about different karma. If you do karma that's sattvic, that's good. That has a good result. You do karma that's rajarsic, you're going to get more karma. But tamasic karma, you're going down. Sattvat sanjayate jnanam rajaso lobha evacha. Pramada moho tamaso bhavato jnanam evacha. From the mode of goodness, real knowledge develops. From the mode of passion, greed. And from the mode of ignorance, foolishness, madness, and illusion. Those in goodness go up to the heavenly planets. Those in passion live here. And those in the abominable mode of ignorance go down to the hellish worlds. So there's another option. You may be born in the animal kingdom, or you may be born on a hellish planet. Of course, some people feel that there are conditions on this earth which are hellish enough. So then Krishna comes back to the idea of knowledge, and he says, Nanyam gunebhya kartaram jadad drashtanu pashyanti gunebhyascha param veti madbhavam sodigachchati. He says, when you can see that in all these activities, there's nothing else at work but the modes of nature. And when one knows the Supreme Lord who is transcendental to these modes, he attains my spiritual nature. So Krishna is saying again, rise above these modes with the help of transcendental knowledge. When the embodied being is able to transcend these three modes associated with the material body, he can become free from birth, death, old age, and their distresses, and enjoy nectar even in this life. Now, Arjuna has been listening to this entire discourse on how the material world comes into existence and how these three different influences pull us in different directions. So he has a question. He says, Arjuna vacha kairlingas trin gunanitan atito bhavati prabho kimachara katam chaitangs trin gunan ativartate. Arjuna asks, oh my Lord, by what symptoms is one known who is transcendental to these three modes? What is his behavior, and how does he transcend the modes of nature? So again, Arjuna is interested in the ethical playing out of these teachings, or what's the takeaway? All right, there's goodness, passion, and ignorance, but how should we act? And especially if somebody is free from these modes of nature, what does he look like? What is his behavior? And so Krishna says, well, he says, one who does not hate illumination, attachment, and delusion when they're present, or long for them when they disappear. That's interesting. Who is unwavering and undisturbed through all these reactions of the material qualities, remaining neutral and transcendental, knowing that the modes alone are active, who is situated in the self and regards alike happiness and distress, who looks upon a lump of earth, a stone, and a piece of gold with an equal eye, who is equal toward the desirable and the undesirable, who is steady, situated equally well in praise and blame, honor and dishonor, who treats alike both friend and enemy, and who has renounced all material activities. Such a person is said to have transcended the modes of nature. So this is interesting because Krishna is pointing out that you may live in a world where the modes of nature are active. You can't avoid that. But he says, you're neither attached to goodness, passion, or ignorance, and neither are you absolutely hateful of these things, but you're kind of neutral. So this means some people are fascinated with the idea of purity for the sake of purity. And then you can't go out of the house because where is that purity? Everything is impure. Say you wanted to offer some fruits and flowers to the deity of Krishna, but you have to get in the car and go to the market and use money to buy those things. Well, the car, the market, the money, they're all contaminated. So you can reject all action and all movement as being impure. Or you can think, well, if I'm engaged in the service of Guru and Vaishnava, I don't really care about how contaminating the smell of gasoline is when I put it into my car, or how contaminating the money is when I have to spend it or earn it, because I'm doing what I'm doing for Krishna. So the important thing is to become steady, situated equally well in praise and blame, honor and dishonor, and treat friend and enemy alike. Now, this doesn't mean you're indifferent to your friends, just as you're indifferent to your enemies. But as Christ said, love your enemies. So love your friends, but love your enemies as well. That's a very difficult thing to do. And then Krishna summarizes the chapter, and he says, how are you supposed to do this? How are you supposed to transcend the modes of nature? He says, Mam chayo vyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevata sagunan samatityayatan brahmabhuyaya kalpate. He says, one who engages in full devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances, at once transcends the modes of material nature and thus comes to the level of Brahman. So if you're fully engaged in bhakti, in the service of Guru and Vaishnava, and not interested in pleasure or pain or gain for yourself, then you can transcend the modes of material nature and come to the spiritual level. And this is really the conclusion of the chapter. This is what Krishna has been saying all along. It's nice to understand how the modes work. And through that kind of transcendental analysis, you can become detached and attain the spiritual level. But Krishna is saying, really, above knowledge is love, as we were saying at the beginning. And just in case you don't understand who the speaker is, Krishna says, Brahmano hi pratishtaham amritas yavyayasya cha shashvatasya cha dharmasya sukhasya kantikasya cha. She says, and I am the basis of that Brahman, that spiritual energy. I'm the basis of that, Krishna is saying. So if you want to know how to transcend the modes of nature, come to me. If you want to become free from birth and death, come to me. If you want to attain transcendental bliss, come to me, surrender to me. Says, I'm the basis of that spiritual energy, which is immortal, imperishable, and eternal, and is the constitutional position of ultimate happiness. And so Prabhupada comments. He says the living entity, although Brahman by nature, has the desire to lord it over the material world and due to this he falls down. In his constitutional position, a living entity is above the three modes of material nature, but association with material nature entangles him in the different modes of material nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance. Due to the association of these three modes, his desire to dominate the material world is there. By engagement in devotional service and full Krishna consciousness, he is immediately situated in a transcendental position, and his unlawful desire to control material nature is removed. Therefore, the process of devotional service, beginning with hearing, chanting, remembering, the prescribed 9 methods for realizing devotional service should be practiced in the association of devotees. Gradually, by such association, by the influence of the spiritual master, one's material desire to dominate is removed, and one becomes firmly situated in the Lord's transcendental loving service. By following such a process, one becomes completely detached from all material activities. So that's the end of the 14th chapter. And I'm sorry if I speak too fast sometimes. I'm trying to get the whole chapter in 1 hour. This is my dolphin teacup. Because the dolphins, I don't know what mode of nature are the dolphins in, but they're up there somewhere. So I don't know if that's clear. I think that chapter is pretty clear. I like reading what the acharyas say. You can look into it about the 3rd verse there. There's a lot in that 3rd verse about sort of the Vedic view of subjective evolution, if you're interested in that. But if there's no questions, I have to move on. I really only had about 1 hour this morning.
Thank you, Mahayogi Prabhu. It was very interesting. Thank you very much. If somebody has any question, you can ask. You can turn on the sound, or you can write in the chat, and then we will write, and then we will ask Mahayogi Prabhu. No questions?
Big shout out, say hello to Tapanandini, who's I can see is on the screen there, from Merida, Yucatan. And I understand you met the Queen, is that right?
Yes, very true. I met the Queen.
You met the Queen of England. I'm just noticing Srila Prabhupada had a few nice words for the Queen. He thought, well, maybe there's something to the idea of divine right of kings and all that. So he gave her some respect, and she just passed away. So I noticed in your comment, you met the Queen of England. Is that right?
Yes, it is right. And I write some anecdote that happened. But my sister wrote a very nice anecdote too. She tells about when the Queen, the Queen was seated next to my father, and next to my father was one successor of the Mayas, a very important line of succession of the Mayas, Gaspar Antonio Shu. And the Queen turned to my father and said, "Oh, and it is a real king?" And my father turned back to the Queen and said, "Well, that surprised me because he, Gaspar Antonio Shu, had just asked me the same question about you."
Wow, that's
So
good.
she laughed. You know, my father was a very, very nice person, and he made everybody laugh. He was very, very humoristic person.
All right, well, thanks so much, Tapanandini, for being here with us. Senon Protsak,
I was
RMD,
in
Sevarupa.
Facebook. I was hearing the class in Facebook because I couldn't, my phone was without any charge.
Oh,
So I heard the whole class in Facebook.
okay. Well, if you're joining us from Facebook or if you're joining us here on Zoom, wherever you are around the world, this is Gita Talks with Braja Sundari and Sevarupa. Nantashesh is there in España. ¿Qué tal? Hola. Ojalá que todo bien. Lydia Lilavati is here and Vrindavan Chandra, Hari Krishna and Govinda Vilas, and of course Shivasini and her husband Kumar. Thank you once again for your excellent hospitality, which went beyond the modes of nature. Something very transcendental going on in Wexford, Ireland. And Mr. A70, thank you for joining us. It's good to see you, and we hope to see you all soon. That concludes the 14th chapter. That means we'll do the 15, 16, 17, and 18. We'll see how quickly we can get through the entire Bhagavad Gita. And I hope that maybe Braja Sundari, with someone's help, can put the Facebook talks up on YouTube so it'll stay longer. But that's it for today. Hare Krishna and Dandavats to all of you. God bless you and thank you for joining us.
Jai Mahayogi Prabhu ki Jai. Hare Krishna.
Thank
Hare
you.
Krishna.
Thank you
Yes,
so much.
thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to see you, Suvashini Didi. Very
Thank you.
happy. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you to
you.
Mahayogi Prabhu and thank
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Nice to see you.
Yes, very nice to see. I'm very happy to see everybody here because we had such a big pause, and so I'm very happy. Hare Krishna. So see you next week, and we will listen about the 15th chapter at the same time next week. Hare Krishna. Dandavats, everybody. I'm very
Dandavad.
happy to see everybody. Dandavats. Thank you. Bye.